Good evening. I am Sambamurthy, Dean of the Wisconsin School of Business. Welcome to another edition of Badger Executive Talks. This is the show that we started a few months ago to have conversations with successful and accomplished Badger leaders to learn about their lessons in leadership shaped through their own journeys and their perspectives on contemporary business and leadership topics. Today, I have great pleasure in welcoming Gayle Fuguitt, who is an alum of the Wisconsin School of Business. She graduated in 1980. She's had a checkered career in marketing, one of the pioneers in marketing research and the concept of listening to the voice of the consumer. But even more importantly, she has traversed the digital space, and I consider her to be a digital marketing guru. So today, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you, Gayle. How are you doing?
Great, Samba. Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Very good. Gayle, I've had the pleasure of getting to know you at the dinner in Minneapolis, and we have had many interesting conversations about digital marketing and the convergence of technology, marketing, and advertising. And I look forward to a wonderful conversation with you this evening. Let's start at the beginning, your Wisconsin journey. What brought you to Madison? And what are some memorable experiences of your time in Madison?
So it's a great question. I was born a Badger. My dad was a PK, or I was a PK. I was a professor's kid. And so I grew up on campus. We ate at the Memorial Union quite often. And frankly, many of us who grew up in Madison, because we grew up on campus, couldn't wait to get out of Dodge. So I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And I can actually testify to both pieces of news about Chapel Hill. One, that it is a top-ranked undergrad program. I got a great education, and it was hard. And also, there was so much partying that they were the first school to have to close early. I could pretty much equally attest to. So when I was at North Carolina, I majored in economics and industrial relations, but I also took so many courses in sociology and methods, in the business school, in English, that I actually ended up graduating with a very deep background, but it was very unfocused. And I interviewed for, I want to say, 80 jobs. I could have wallpapered my dorm room with rejection letters. And look, that was the first kind of hard knock after having spent 4 years. But I realized that I did not have a story that hung together about what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be. And what I did know is that I really loved these methods courses that I took in sociology. And I also really loved a class in marketing. And I was really intrigued by branding. And I think the third piece was kind of in industrial relations, was this whole idea of the social psychology of organizations. And that really drew me to the topic and the area of leadership and organizational design. And those pieces kind of became hallmarks ultimately of where I ended up. But when I moved home, we were just speaking about having our kids at home and being okay for them not to be at home. And that's pretty much what happened when I moved home. After about 6 weeks, my dad said, I think you better go to grad school. So conveniently enough, I was in Madison, and there was this new program in market research, which was a perfect combination of my fandom, my love of marketing, but also methodology and the work that I had done to really figure out, all right, how do you actually measure consumer behavior and consumer sentiments, but about brands so that you could see the results on the shelf. Because academic research can be slow, and it can be maybe it's hard to see the results in a marketplace like a grocery store. So I got in that program, thankfully, And I ultimately, it became the AC Nielsen Center for Market Research. I was on the board, and when I worked at General Mills, I was asked, would I be the General Mills rep on the board? And I went, and we didn't go out in the industry in those days because we were afraid of giving away our secrets. And what I realized, though, when I went to the first AC Nielsen Center board meeting, was that everyone knew each other. And when it came time to vote for officers, they knew exactly who to vote for. And I didn't know any of them. And so that became my peer network. And Gil Churchill and the AC Nielsen now Center for Marketing, Analytics, and Insights, and I could not be more pleased with Kristen and Niraj's decision to push to change that name. It's perfect. That was a place I paid it forward at General Mills. I hired as many Wisconsin students. It was referred to as the Wisconsin Mafia as I possibly could. And I can never give enough tribute to Wisconsin or to that program, frankly.
It's wonderful. I think I've heard the word Wisconsin Mafia in so many different ways. So I should be, as I told you before, I should be Don Sambamurthy and not Dean Sambamurthy.
You didn't know that's what you were getting into.
Right. So, Gayle, in conversations with fellow Badger alums, what I've learned is that we thrive in adversity. Adversity is an opportunity. And I know that that is true in your journey too. And your moment of adversity came right after undergrad. So could you share with us what was that moment, how you conquered it, and what lessons did you learn that shaped your own leadership journey?
Right. So when I actually after I got through the AC Nielsen Center for Market Research, like right after undergrad, I couldn't get a job. That was a real blow. But then I was lucky enough to get into the AC Nielsen Center. Then flash forward, now we're interviewing, and I had an interview with General Mills, and I was over the top because I always wanted to work at General Mills. I mean, we knew all about it for Madison. It was in Minneapolis. And I like to eat and I like to cook. And I was just really fascinated with the idea of doing research on food. And so I had an interview, and it was with a gentleman named Jack that ran the in-house research supplier at General Mills. We did 30% of our research using our own proprietary techniques. And what happened was I was really well prepared. Some might say over-prepared because I really wanted the job, but I was not highly ranked in the class. And there were only 4 of us, and I knew I wasn't first or second. So I had not been presented necessarily to Jack as the top candidate. And when I got in the interview with him, and I don't know, I'm sure there are people in the audience that have blown interviews before, but that's kind of the punchline of the story.
Right.
When I got in the interview, there was a moment where he looked at me and he said, "Can you write?" And I said, "Yes." I can, because I took all those English classes. Then he said, "Can you write well?" And I said, "Yes." And at this point, he leaned back and he kind of chuckled like, "Well, who the heck do you think you are?" And I thought, all right, this is bad. But I said, "Actually, I have examples of my writing with me. Would you like to see them?" Because I had brought my thesis, my research, and another example of my writing in my portfolio. And I got it out. And he said, no, that's okay. So I left and I was deflated. And Gil Churchill pulled me aside, shortly after and said, "What did you say to him?" "They loved you. They're going to invite you to Minneapolis for an interview." So, my lesson from that, Samba, and it's a very important one, is, you know, I knew in the back of my mind I wasn't top in the group. I knew in the back of my mind that I wasn't presented as you know, necessarily here, choose this one in the shell game.
Right.
But I didn't let that peg me. I didn't let it put me in a spot. Because if I had, I wouldn't have answered that question that way. I was able to be myself. So I think the most interesting part of the story is the biggest lesson of all. And that is, you never know with relationships what's going to happen and why they're important. And Jack ended up working for me 18 years later when I became the officer of the function. And he was running that in-house research supplier. So that relationship was so important.
Yeah. What is also interesting is never assume the tell from an interview is an indicator of how you've done. Clearly, your first reaction, your success were not exactly correlated, but that's wonderful. And so here you are now, you started market research at General Mills. You rose all the way to becoming the vice president of global consumer insights. Then you followed that up with a career and service as the chief of customer insight at Foursquare. In my conversations with you, you have evangelized about the importance of market research and consumer insight as critical in making decisions. Could you share more on that point of view and why that's important for everybody who's listening in to recognize that it's such an important element of important decision making?
Look, I always believed in the voice of the consumer at the decision table. I could see when I got to General Mills the richness of information that we had. And I believed that it could be even richer because we were very, very inculcated in methods and capabilities. And articles were being written and shots across the bow in academic journals about persuasion versus recall in advertising measurement. And what senior management said about research was, oh yeah, you're the guys that come down off the mountain in your togas with your tablets from time to time. We are considered to be slow, methodical, and quite frankly, out of touch. And I mean, one of the things that Gayle always asked me to speak about if I taught a class or something was actionable research. He said, Gayle, I look at the way you do research and it's always actionable. Because I saw so many important business decisions that were being made without research, and so much time and money being spent by researchers perfecting. And so what I was able to do over the course of my career by building partnerships, both within the company and outside the company, was to go from tablets and togas to speed versus perfection and deliver better, faster, cheaper solutions. But, you know, frankly, Samba, I think that the best way to reflect on anyone's accomplishments is what did someone that watched them or experienced that time, what were their insights? And now we're just going to have a little COVID moment.
Yeah.
Because we're in my office in Minneapolis, and like others, I imagine I went through an eye clean so that you could actually see something in office. And I cleaned out all my correspondence from when I retired from General Mills, and I found this card. And this is the card that Jack, remember Jack that interviewed me?
Yeah.
This is the card that Jack wrote me when I retired. And he had already retired a few years before me. So he said, Gayle, your retirement announcement left me with two thoughts. One, didn't I just interview you in Madison? And two, okay, I get it. You've already accomplished enough to fill several resumes. Congratulations on a trailblazing career.
Nice.
Now, what I want you all to know about Jack is he could be brutally candid, and he had also a great sense of humor. But it was a kind of a Minnesota sense of humor. So he said, my take on why your career matters is that you were the first to really understand how to read and respond to the top company officers. Being the first researcher to reach the VP level was well-deserved recognition of your skill in making the function relevant. My personal memory is appreciation for your trust in letting me run CRS. I don't think he really loved working for me, to be honest. With a free hand, so I kind of stayed out of his way. And this is my favorite line of all, but I'm not going to name the names that he names. As a boss, you set high standards, which many people have said about me. And unlike any of my previous bosses who he named, he really understood what we did, and we couldn't BS you. That's the candor. And he said, he closed by saying, I particularly admire your ability to think on your feet. So that's speed. But I always was speaking on behalf of the consumer. Your uncanny ability to read the atmospherics of a meeting, and your graciousness in hosting recognition events.
That's wonderful.
That's how I led.
Yeah.
I just had a great gift at General Mills of mentors and partners and challengers and competitors.
Right.
Made all that possible, but mostly my team and the Jacks of the world.
Well, clearly you thrived, but you also shaped and you conquered. And then you moved on to becoming the first woman CEO of the Advertising Research Foundation. For a lot of our listeners, especially women who aspire to leadership positions, what advice do you have about a leadership perspective that you crafted? What challenges did you face that might have been unique? And what advice do you have?
Well, number one, know what you stand for and what you value. Like, I believed in the consumer at the decision table, and I believed that there would be a role for that. And hanging on to that belief will have highs and lows.
Right.
I think the second important thing is you have to find your own way. So in 1980, the way that you would get ahead was to build a model. That would be an analytic model behind the scenes. But see, I believed in the voice of the consumer at the decision table. And I believed that we could really make a difference attaching ourselves to the biggest business decisions by bringing that voice early and often. And so literally, ultimately, I did create a model, but it was a business model. Because I started to view myself as a business person. For women and who I refer to as the underrepresented,
Yeah.
the underdog. And I was the only woman on the management team for 15 years.
Wow. Yeah.
I had to learn how to play business golf, which was not a good idea for me, but I had to do it.
Yeah.
You know, the idea of coming up with a business model and having someone say, you know, yes, you can invest $20 million in venture capital, which I believed in and I knew I could delivered the company 10 times faster research that was 80% less expensive and more reliable. And that enabled us to shift from traditional research to the internet.
Mm.
And prior to that, I really believe that the third thing that I want people to imagine, women, men, young, old, you know, this applies to everyone, is ask for what you want. There was a point in time when I went to who became our future CEO at General Mills. He had already been selected for that. And I said, you know, I think there should be an officer. And I think that based on the things that I have done, that I should be a candidate for that.
Yeah.
And I was scared to death.
Yeah.
And he didn't tell me no. But then it was waiting a really long time. And then I went back and had another conversation, and that one didn't actually go well. He's like, what are you doing here? And because they're going to go at their own pace.
Yeah.
But I think ask for what you want. And then the final thing is sit at the table. Don't sit behind the table. And if you're at the table, and my team knew this about me, you have to speak.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many of my employees begged to be in the meeting, and they found out quickly if they didn't say anything, we just have a little quiet conversation outside the hall.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, you know. So many of us work hard to get to the table, but that's only half the journey. It's about act like you belong at the table, and that's a great message. So another fascinating aspect of your journey is that you have had to challenge traditional assumptions. When you started your passion for and your belief in market research and consumer insights, that was relatively new at that time. And you had to convince people, you had to stick firm to your conviction. And it taught you lessons in how do you believe in what you believe in and challenge assumptions in a respectful but firm way. So, how does that shape your beliefs about leadership in terms of implementing change at a time when there might not be many believers in the cause of that change?
Build as many relationships and alliances as you possibly can. Find allies outside your company.
Right.
I would say, especially at the ARF, because we had 400 member companies.
Yeah.
In media tech, the networks, I'd say it was a bridge between Silicon Valley, Hollywood, and Madison Avenue. The networks, the media tech, Nielsen, traditional research suppliers, and most important of all, the advertisers. And what I discovered was no one company can do it all.
Okay.
And so I would really push down barriers. And I'll give you an example. Everyone was doing big segmentation studies. This is in the late 90s, early 2000s. And we wanted to do a world of food study, a big segmentation study. It was going to complement work that we did that was ethnography. In that study, we had over 100,000 hours of motion detected video camera on a
Yeah.
subscription basis of consumers' actual behavior. Some in the audience may remember that and may have experienced that. In the world of segmentation, you could either do behavioral segmentation or you could do attitudinal segmentation. And you had to choose. And what I did was I got competitors together. And it didn't always go well. At the end, when the awards were given out, though, they all sat together in the front of the auditorium. And, you know, I think we're as equally proud as my team was of the accomplishment. And we uncovered over $150 million in opportunities, new business opportunities that were quantified, that were based on attitudes and behavior and specific need states. And we were able to actually put those segments into personas. And to tie this together, what we did is we actually, in order to teach people about it, we would have people take the survey and find out what segment they were in. And my most memorable experience with that was when we had the General Mills Board of Directors take the survey before we presented what our findings were.
Right.
So the breaking down barriers is all the way to being able to be at a board table and have them recognize that they are not all the same in terms of their values, of their needs, and of what their desires are. And that's a very, very, very important way to kind of break the ice. If you want to have them listen to the consumer, we're just the purveyor of the voice of the consumer.
Gayle, there have been so many interesting takeaways from your journey that you also have the wisdom from your journey to talk about some of the contemporary business challenges that we are seeing. Even before the pandemic, we were in what I would regard as the perfect storm moment with the technology, globalization, intense rivalry, and the COVID disruptions have only accelerated everything. So what do you believe businesses can learn from consumer behavior in this moment? And how do you define changes in consumer behavior when you step back with the wealth of your knowledge and experience?
Yeah, this is a very important question because this COVID is discerning in the business landscape winners and losers. There doesn't really seem to be as much in the middle. And so in, like, for example, Campbell's soup any brand of soup is up 14%. That's a highly profitable category. Now, is that a windfall gain?
Yeah.
And how are they going to go up against that in 2 years? Because that's how the street is going to look at it. It's like, why is your volume down?
Yeah.
We'll be explaining these COVID trends for years. What's critically important, again, is the role of the researcher to be able to say, what is a fad and what is a trend? What is going to stick? I mean, is the need for comfort food going to be something that we're just always going to be yearning for more, having been through this experience? Or was that a practical choice? And what role does value play? Because our economics are really different. If we're not traveling, there's more discretionary income. And what are we spending that on? So I think that really, really going in and understanding the deep needs of consumers and what the motivations are is a real opportunity. And most of all is um, resisting asking consumers what they think, and instead really watching their behavior, continuing to really measure their behavior,
Yeah.
and do it in as clever a ways as possible. It's hard to do in-person ethnography these days, but there's some very, very powerful um, video techniques that are available where consumers can take a video of themselves and send it to you. And that's a different kind of way of getting, and as they're experiencing a product, describing an eating or a shopping experience, which is not a survey per se.
It's interesting because there are so many either temporary spikes or maybe longer term trends that we are seeing, whether that's COVID noise or COVID long term trends. And once again, your wealth of experience in consumer behavior, consumer insight, and building the science to that so that we can actually truly discern what is a longer term trend would be very critical. Another important element, and I'm eager to hear your opinion, is that the COVID has accelerated the work from home. And what's interesting to speculate about is what have we learned from work from home? And what do we think, or what do you think might be the future of work as we get past these work from home trends? Is work from home here to stay, or does it have a downside? What are the positives? How do you visualize or prognosticate about the future of work? Eager to hear your thoughts.
So this one for me is the end of lunch. Because how many times would we say, let's have lunch?
Yeah.
And in a technology company, 2 days a week, in my most recent experience in technology, it was free lunch. We all ate together. I mean, we were breaking bread together 2 days a week. And the level of interaction between that and the snack bar, which is the proverbial water cooler,
Yes.
it enables a combination of socializing and work and creative conversations. And which used to be even in the area of creative. So I would draw attention to this question over to the area of creative and advertising, creating great advertising and consumer connections. And I think that where I started thinking about this was how unfortunate it was that creatives couldn't connect and create sparks with each other. And I've shifted recently my thinking on this because of so many exciting new technologies, in particular dynamic creative optimization, that enable us to connect and be even closer to the consumer at their invitation, and to deliver upwards of 160 different creative executions that are enabled based on the consumer's user-generated content. And then to actually do copy testing literally on 160 different iterations that can be delivered on their mobile phone.
Right.
And so I see this in the creative industry as being actually revolutionizing the creating creative to make consumer connections.
Right.
And I think that's going to be really fascinating to follow, because we know that 75% of advertising effectiveness is driven by creative,
Right.
and not by the media plan.
Right. And that's going to be an interesting paradox. How do you balance productivity with creativity and innovation, and with people satisfaction, wellness, and health? And certainly, as we were talking, the initial days of the COVID disruption seemed like people were happier and productive, but of late there have begun to have be more conversations about is that really true, or what are we missing by not having those proverbial water cooler and lunch impromptu conversations. And it'll be fascinating to see whether our unilateral prognostications about the future of the workplace will hold up. Few companies had announced that, well, we're just going to move more toward work from home, and it'll be interesting. So appreciate your insights.
So
So Gail,
I want to do just a quick build on this
please.
that bridges two of the topics. I had so many employees, men and women, that wanted to have flexible work arrangements.
Yeah.
And it was not ever kindly viewed upon. And I always gave people a chance, because what I learned pretty quickly is if they came and asked for a flexible work arrangement, they were committed to making it work.
Yeah.
And that was frankly my experience. And you had to look the other way to maybe there were ways that they could have broken the rules or whatever. Like, you have to just take that cynicism away from it. I think in this day and age, we're going to need the work environment to flex itself around people's lives and around families and the way that people are constructing their families, and around inclusion. And it's, it's a very different diversity, equity, inclusion kind of angle that I think is going to be really, really important. So I think we should embrace this as being more than the logistics of whether you're in an office and your lighting is working or not. And really think about the opportunity that it creates to have a healthier, happier, and more productive workforce.
Yeah. Before we go to the audience for questions, the one final question I have for you for right now is that what also was intrigued, you grew up in an academic environment, and through your career, you talked about how you saw a positive value in collaboration between industry and academia, and you believe that that was a virtuous relationship. So can you share a bit about your perspective and how it benefited your industry role, and how you strengthened your effectiveness through these academic collaborations?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough about this. Clearly, my experience was largely formed by the Nielsen Center at Wisconsin. But I also was involved with the University of Minnesota. I was on the Wharton Future of Advertising Board. I've just been involved with a lot of different colleges and universities over time and taught. I believe that academia, what I worry about a lot is who is going to set the intellectual bar and the bar for truth and objectivity at a time when trust is at an all-time low. And I think it's incumbent on each of us as business people to, check the sources of data, understand that the opt-out, if it's data from a mobile phone, that the opt-out is as easy to find as the opt-in, that it's permission-based, and it's first-party. There are checks that we need to do. And there's clearly some legislation, CCPA and GDPR, that are trying to ensure that. But I feel like there's more sanctity in academic research and the science that goes back and looks at what is the truth about either advertising effectiveness, brand building, loyalty, the future of compensation, organizational design, the role of product marketing versus product management, like engineering and marketing. I
Yeah.
think they're just some really, really important topics. Having worked in a corporation, what I would do is, I think there's a key skill, which is zoom in and zoom out to give a
Yeah.
different angle on Zoom. It's that bifocal vision.
Right.
And what I would do is identify those long-term issues, those 3 to 5 year out issues, and I would invest in them in the first quarter before they took my money away.
Right.
And that's where I would seek out academic partners, other corporate partners, startup partners. And that, I know that helped us be ahead in a different way on a high intellectual platform.
Well, clearly that model that you helped us build not only has strengthened the Nielsen Center, it has helped solidify the reputation of the marketing group at the Wisconsin School of Business as one of the top 10 groups in the country. And so certainly there's a virtuous relationship for all sides. Gayle, we've had a fascinating conversation, and it looks like we have triggered a lot of good questions from the audience. So let's go to the audience. And the first question for you is from David. And the question is, Gayle, have you ever used the jobs to be done framework to explore consumer needs and insights? How does its utility compare to other methods?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I've done quite a bit of work with this over the years. So to help the audience, jobs to be done is a framework that it's an important one, and I like it a lot, that suggests that every product has a job that it does for a person. And in order to unlock a brand's positioning, if you understand the job that the product is doing, you can actually unlock growth. And I agree with that way of thinking about things. My perspective on it is sometimes it's hard to aggregate a large consumer base on whether you got the right job or not, whether you identified the right job or not, when there are different ones. And what I also really like about it is the way I think about it is head, heart, hand, and feet. And that's product marketing, but the head are features. And a job to be done is not a feature. So it isn't more chocolate chips or a double stuffed Oreo or a minivan that opens on both sides of the car. It's actually the heart.
Yeah.
And if you think about a job that a product will do, it will give you, if it's a convenience product, how about a product that gives you more time to spend with your family instead of preparing? So how about a product that that helps you start your day out on the right foot?
Yeah.
You out the door in the right place. That's a job. Those are jobs. But what you can hear in that is the heart. It's the emotion in it.
Right.
And then hand is how we're reaching each other these days.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you describe that job on a 5-second video? And then the feet is like, did they vote with their feet? Did they buy it? Is it growth?
Yeah. Interesting. You have in your journey, also seen the advent of digitization and the data revolution and analytics. So think about marketing. Marketing originally was driven a lot by insights based upon intuition and experience. And then today, we are drowning in data. So the question is, does the data form the intuition, or does the intuition form what you're looking for in the data? And it's an interesting tension. So, what is your view today on the role of analytics in consumer insights and learning from the market? What mistakes do we make, or how best what we think about analytics in marketing research?
That's a good question. Um, First, analytics are going to be absolutely critical. It's an obvious point. You know, the extreme explosion of data and our access to data is really critical. I actually had a call with a professor at Boston College this afternoon, and we were discussing. They mentioned that their students are just all enamored with and focusing on their data. And so the conversation we had was around, what decision do you want to make?
Right.
And starting there. And then going to what, and this is what I learned at General Mills, what is your criteria for decision making? And you make that decision before you do your test or your analysis. And I don't see as much of that being done today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then finally, how do you design your research to actually answer the question of what your problem was that you started with? And keep those things really bolted together. And it's literally begin with the end in mind. So I would imagine, you know, something that this is the AC Nielsen Center, but that size font, that's the answer to senior management. So it's not drowning them in a sea of data, and otherwise we're back to where we started. We're just reading off a lot of numbers, but what do they mean?
Yeah.
So I want to tell a data story.
Please.
So I had to give my numbers bio because I had to create it. I decided to create it, and this is a data story. And I did it because I had to introduce myself when I moved to New York, and it was like, Gayle, you're not in Minnesota anymore. And but my introduction was, you know, a 400-story building. So I had to crisp it up. So this is a story being told by the numbers. Some of it you've already heard. 32 years at General Mills. 19 bosses in 21 years. 2 were women. They were not very big fans of mine. Invested $70 million in venture capital. I started with 100 employees, including Jack, and a $50 million budget. I grew the department. We grew the department. It was by virtue of my employees, 250 employees worldwide, and a $150 million budget. And then I retired for 9 months.
What a journey.
Four years at the ARF. We unlocked $33 billion, 3 years at Foursquare, built $15 million worth of business, and I have 1 husband, 1 dog, 1 son, and he has 1 fiance.
Gayle, that actually would be a nice bell-shaped distribution. Once at the ends and a lot of numbers in the middle. Quite a good way to capture that. I want to pick up on what you talked about data and the tension between data and intuition. Have you ever gone against what the data was telling you? And did that pay off, or was it a bust?
You know, this is really interesting. I like this question. I think the flip was more true. The things that there are 2 sides to this. It's primarily General Mills experience. One side is sometimes the data appears to be incontrovertible. It's telling you have to do this. Something wins 90-10. And at that point, you're like, well, any questions? We're running out the door. The harder thing for me was, for example, with Cheerios, it was almost a promotion, but it was Cheerios X's and O's. So we literally put X's like tic-tac-toe in with the O's.
Yeah.
And that was agonizing for me, because the data said 100% yes, consumers want this. And what I believed was they wanted it because of the novelty of it, but it wasn't a Cheerio. And I believed that it was going to rub up against the equity of the brand.
Yeah.
And so I think the data, I mean, New Coke is a great example. We were chatting about that, but I think the data can mislead. But the other thing is, when you have data that says what you should do, we had a pricing situation where Post took their cereal down to $2.99. We had to figure out in 5 days what our pricing strategy was going to be, but it was going to be difficult to execute in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Because the sales organization was going to have to get everything at $1.99 instead of $2, $2.99 instead of $3, $3.99 instead of $4, and that was like store by store, SKU by SKU. That was a really onerous task. But if we didn't do it, we were going to lose a lot of sales. Yeah. So that one I had to take up the line literally, and I did, something that other people would raise their eyebrows at in the Midwest. I went up to the CEO of the company on the hangar. We happened to be at an airport, and I told him what the data said and what we had to do. Yeah. Period. And he pushed it back down the line. So it's the point of being able to be influential with the decision makers and help them hear what consumers are saying.
Right. And the key to that also is the ability to not just drown in insight, but to tell a story and extract the insight and then be able to tell a persuasive story. Looks like that's what was your strength. Goes back to what you said in your first interview, where they said, can you write, and can you write well? And something we forget, sometimes we forget that insights are nothing unless you can tell them in a story. Another question for you, Gayle, is as you began to rise up the leadership ladder and as you became a VP of Global Consumer Insights, you must have observed the rise of a new title, the Chief Marketing Officer, which has begun to gain greater and greater currency. Recently, I promoted one of my colleagues to be the Chief Marketing Officer for the Wisconsin School of Business. So what's your perspective, and what advice would you want to give wannabe CMOs, marketing professionals in this audience?
Well, this will shock everyone, I'm sure. I would say run, don't walk, to find your Chief Insights Officer. And have them be your right-hand person.
Yeah.
It's the one thing that I insisted on, was not reporting to the Chief Marketing Officer. A lot of structures are like that today, because they were creating, and then I would have to evaluate their creative.
Yeah.
And that's a very difficult reporting relationship.
Yeah.
So I think, look, when I started, marketing they were the swells. They ran the company, and we considered ourselves second-class citizens. And we literally had people with titles that were in secondary data, primary research and secondary research. And I changed some of that because I was like, who wants to be secondary?
Yeah.
But, quite frankly, early on in my career, very early on, it was like I recognized that I was like a data waitress. They're like, I want a 3-panel test. And I'm kind of like, do you want fries with that? And they're like, and I want it pronto. And I'd run off and I'd do that.
Yeah.
And then what I realized is, no. It's being a collaborator and a partner and listening.
Yeah.
And there's no more important thing than listening to what the CMOs' needs are, and for them to have a sounding board that can represent the consumer.
That's a great answer, Gayle. Where do you look for inspiration?
So I loved your comments about the importance of a story.
Yeah,
And I want to tell a quick story.
please.
Back in 2000, I had to give a speech to 6,000 General Mills employees worldwide. And I was in the dress rehearsal, and it was a speech about changing from market research to consumer insights. So it was a talk about how we as a company were going to bring the consumer closer to everyone that I was speaking to. And in those days, the way the speeches were given, and it was senior management and me, nine guys and me, and it was a black notebook on a podium, and you read your speech. And I had my dress rehearsal, and Eric, tech guy, said, quite unfortunately, in front of our CEO, because he was next in the rehearsal, Gayle, you're not very dynamic.
Huh.
And that is a Minnesota way of saying you are bad. So he said, step away from the podium. And I thought, how in the world am I going to open this? And I took the biggest risk, but it was the only one I knew how. My inspiration comes from my family, my life, and my experiences, and the people whose lives I've been able to touch, and the people who I learned from. And so that night, I was like, I have to give an example where consumer behavior paints a better picture and tells a better story than any numbers or survey or any research I could possibly do. So I happened to be in the hospital in the emergency room waiting because my son, who was 11, had broken his arm that day. His dad was on a business trip, and my speech was the next morning. And the doctor said to my son, did you have anything to eat or drink? Because that's the question before surgery.
Yeah.
And so I'm not paying much attention, but I'm a mom, I'm kind of hoping. Okay, so yes, Cheetos, Doritos, a candy bar, and did you have anything to drink? And okay, I'm a mom, I'm from Wisconsin. I'm like hoping for milk or maybe chocolate milk. And the answer is Mountain Dew. And I took a risk and I stepped away from the podium and I told my story. And everyone in the audience, and I was told particularly the IT guys, because they love junk food, could relate to what we were really trying to do, which was really unlock actual consumer behavior. Right. And bring that voice to the decision table. That's where my inspiration comes from.
Wonderful. So Gayle, we heard about your journey from adversity, finding that interview and not being sure if you made it, through finding your voice to emerging as the guru. So if there is a book written by Gayle Fuguitt, what would the title of that book be?
Oh, the book is definitely Tell Me Your Story.
Nice.
Everyone has a story.
Nice.
You all have been gracious enough to hear my story. And, with humility, empathy, and curiosity, it's Tell Me Your Story. And then there's a sequel, which is You Can See It in Their Eyes, because listening skills are the most important thing of all. And
I like it.
When you tell your story and you listen, you can see it in their eyes.
I like it. Your wisdom and your humanity comes through. Gayle, I really enjoyed our conversation this evening. Lots of interesting insights, and I'm sure that our audience also loved it, and a lot more will be able to watch it on YouTube. So thank you very much for joining me tonight, and good night.
Thank you, Samba.
Thank you very much. And to all our listeners out there, I hope you continue to enjoy the insights from our Badger Executive Talk. Please join us in October for our next speaker, Cheryl Stallworth. She has also had an interesting journey through a variety of experiences, and she is currently the co founder of Shedlight. So we look forward to listening to her journey through iconic brands like Coca Cola, Colgate, and her current role. So thank you very much and good night.